Mark, it's so good to be talking with you again. And I've got to ask you, we're going to talk a lot about your company's culture. We're going to talk about innovation. But I've got to talk to you first about the past year, past 12 months, the past couple of weeks, the start to a new year that's been a rough one, to say the least. Smucker's is a company that's been around for more than a century. You guys have seen wars, you've seen a financial crisis, you've seen segregation, you've seen the end of segregation, you saw 9/11, you've seen so much. So how do you, as a company that's seen so much and with such incredible history, how do you kind of put this environment into perspective?
Well, first of all, Carol, thank you for having me. The first thing I would say, yes, we have been around for 124 years, and we can't diminish the significance of this humanitarian crisis that we all find ourselves in. But I think we do have to try to look forward to the future and think about how are we as a company helping society? How are we making society a better place? We obviously make food, we make things that are, make the consumer happy, but we also have a responsibility to the communities in which we work as well. So all of the ways that we can support them through volunteerism, obviously, education, feeding America, all of those things. It is a dual role that we have in society today.
Is it safe to say a stressful one? Because I'm curious about what your employees might be asking of you today and what you're asking of your leadership to kind of get everyone through this environment.
Well, the first thing that we're asking our leadership is to, number one, focus, but also in focusing, we have to take care of our employees. And that starts with mental health. We have made a significant push with our employees to make sure that they know what resources are available to them. It is a trying time, but fundamentally, we have to start with keeping our own house in order, protecting our employees, which will in turn allow us to do better in business.
Well, it's interesting, too, you say to do better in business. Business right now, I was talking to Richard Edelman of the PR firm Edelman, and they do a trust barometer, and they say that right now, business was more trusted than government in 18 of 27 countries, and the expectations are for CEOs to focus on societal engagement with the same rigor, thoughtfulness, and energy used to deliver on profits. And I'm curious, are you seeing that? Do you see that now as kind of extra responsibilities in your role?
As a company, Carol, we always have taken a view, again, that we do have a responsibility to society. I think what has shifted in the last 5 to 10 years is you do see business leaders being more vocal and taking stances, not necessarily political stances, but fundamentally, it's about doing what's right. And so even if we choose not to make a statement publicly, even internally with 7,000 employees, there is an expectation that we stand up for what is right, whether that's condemning violence in any form or what have you. But we do see a desire from employees and the society at large to be a bit more vocal on those issues.
Well, it's interesting, too, this whole focus, Mark, you know this, of multiple stakeholders, right? It's something that's come out of the Business Roundtable. Your history, and help me if I've gotten the genealogy right. I think your grandfather and former CEO of the company, Paul Smucker, wrote a letter back in the 1980s. And then I think it's your great-great-grandfather, J.M. Smucker, laid out these core values, these basic beliefs, about ethics and quality and people. And it's just pretty fascinating that it feels like the company, in many ways, was ahead of its time, considering the environment we're now in. And now all of a sudden, everyone's talking about this.
It's really interesting. You said it very well. We have been focused on this for decades, for our entire existence. Even before the Business Roundtable came out, we talk about our constituencies, right? And the employees, consumers, customers, suppliers, all of them leading to shareholders. And so philosophically, what we have always said is that if we take care of all of the other constituents, then automatically the shareholder will be taken care of. And that is essentially precisely what the Business Roundtable said.
Well, so this is so much a part of your culture then. So tell me, how do you keep that culture going during something like the pandemic in the last year that we've had, where people are just struggling to keep their home life, together. People are struggling to take care of maybe family members that are sick. So I'm curious, your culture at Smucker seems really well defined, and it has been for decades, as you just said. So how has the pandemic affected that culture?
Well, first of all, as you referenced earlier, we have our basic beliefs, which is how we refer to our core values. We have always said that we have to be willing to change. And that means we can change everything, even our strategy, and we have many times over our history, but never change those values that are foundational to our culture. So in a virtual world, we have been much more forgiving in terms of, our kids running through the frame, our dogs are barking, and this whole notion that each of us, when we are home, are managing both our personal and our work lives. So ensuring that we're allowing, we're giving the flexibility to employees. We're being forgiving in terms of even the hours of work. We've consciously said, try not to schedule meetings before 9 or after 4 so that we can protect some of that work-life balance.
Well, and it's interesting too that I know when we talked on our prep call, I think it came out, you guys have this really Midwestern, component of your culture, and it's a good thing. But I do wonder, your name is on the door, and I think about this culture and this idea of being nice, and how do you kind of keep that going and be Midwestern nice, especially in a world where, so much can be misconstrued. It's not so easy to do that.
Right. We are in the Midwest, and that is, what's fundamental about our culture is this collaborative nature. We are very competitive externally, but internally, we're very collaborative. And I think that can manifest itself sometimes in ensuring that, we're not hurting each other's feelings. But at the end of the day, and particularly as the leader of the company, I need to set the tone and hold folks accountable. So at the end of the day, we still do have to make difficult decisions. We recently announced 2 divestitures. Those are not easy decisions to make. They're the right ones for our business, but ensuring that we balance doing what's right for the business, but also preserving, as you said, some of those core values.
Well, it's interesting too when you guys are going through a transformation, right? And you are doing these divestitures. And we have seen so many companies through the pandemic. They've got to learn to innovate. They've got to learn to pivot. And you guys, there's a word that you used with me, and this focus on being agile. And I don't think, forgive me, we think of agility related to a tech company, right? Like we kind of get that. We don't necessarily think apply it to a company that's been around for more than 100 years, but you guys are thinking about that in a big way.
Yes, absolutely. And even the pandemic itself has actually caused us to take on more agility. So it's caused us to respond quicker to our customers. It's caused us to take a much harder look at all of the items, the individual products in our portfolio, and trim down what we are fundamentally focusing on. The one example I can give you where we pivoted very quickly during the pandemic was with Jif peanut butter. And we essentially needed to only manufacture 5 items, 4 creamy and 1 crunchy. And so all of the other items we pressed pause on for some period of time just to ensure that we're getting the core stuff to the consumer. Uncrustable sandwiches, we only were making peanut butter, strawberry, and grape. So we put the other ones on hold just to make sure that we could get the core products to our customers.
Well, and it's interesting too. Does this stay with you then, Mark, going forward? Do you kind of say, maybe we have too many choices out there. We don't need to do that. Maybe consumers, I know in my world, the pandemic, it just simplified things. And I'm trying to carry that forward with me. And I just wonder, does that stay with you guys? Is that kind of the innovation that stays?
Yes, it's 100%. It has to. Making some of these difficult choices of what's in or what's out is really critical to our success moving forward. Even in terms of marketing and how we're communicating with consumers, we very quickly shifted, for example, advertising that was relatively new on Folgers to advertising that was culturally relevant, if you will, to the environment that we all find ourselves in. So it is a responsibility that we have to ensure that this agility and our ability to respond quickly is a capability that we have built, a muscle that we have developed during this strange time we're in.
You open the door to Folgers. Let's go there, because I drank Folgers in college. It was really easy, and I could always have it fresh. Fast forward, I'm not going to tell you how many years, but listen, we have lots of choices now, right? You can get organic beans that are from a family farm or from Costa Rica, and we can do French press, or we can do, you name it. You guys make K-Cups, so you're obviously looking at these different markets, but how do you innovate a brand like Folgers, right, that has a long history, but that has some baggage with it, right? So how do you innovate?
That's a great question. So with Folgers, there's no question that social media and technology has allowed consumers access to a variety of different brands and products that they may not have had access to in the past. And so in this time when consumers do want to simplify, we have seen millions of consumers come back to the Folgers franchise. And we have actually seen Folgers start growing again, which has been fantastic. We're helping that along with, again, the advertising and so forth. But specifically to innovation, it's making sure that we continue to stay relevant. We are on a multi-year journey with Folgers, which starts with the consumer communication. Consumers want bolder, darker roasts, so we are providing those in a new product line called Folgers Noir. It's constantly paying attention and speaking to our consumers and understanding what they want so that we can deliver that to them. And I'm very pleased with the progress we've made, so more to come.
You mentioned advertising a couple of times. I'm curious about social. How important is that in kind of reaching a different audience, maybe a younger audience? And I'm also curious about influencers or celebrities. Like, how do you guys think about that? Take a Coke or a Pepsi, right? They've often aligned with a celebrity. Take, sports, gear. So I'm just curious how that plays into it.
Sure. So Folgers, in particular, as it relates to influencers and social, across our portfolio, we have leveraged those capabilities. Keeping these consumers in the franchise is largely about targeting. It's knowing which consumers are new and trying to push messaging to them through the social channels. In terms of celebrities, as you know, we are engaged with Rachel Ray on Nutrish, which is one of our leading dog food brands. That has been a very successful partnership for us. We also do think about whether it's influencers or celebrities. Obviously, maybe our pockets aren't as deep as some of our larger competitors, but we will continue to look at those opportunities as well. So more to come.
So more to come. Stay tuned. All right, you'll fill us in later. And I especially think about your industry, right, is one where winning is a game of inches, right? It's small increments. So I'm curious, how do you define and explain innovation to your team where winning is in these small increments?
It's multiple things, and you are right. It is a game of inches. And so it starts with focusing on the capabilities, just the few sets of capabilities that we need to win. So it's very simple things like at the store level, whether that's the digital shelf or the real, shelf, we have to make sure that our products are on the shelf and in stock. It's something that simple. As it relates to consumers, it's how we communicate them, things that we've already touched on in terms of making sure that we find those new consumers and re-engage with them. So it's really customer, consumer, building those capabilities that are focused on those two constituencies.
Hey, how has digital impacted your world? I've got to ask you, because that's one theme that we've talked about, Mark, so much over the last year, is the digitization or further digitization. And companies that had strategies that they were maybe going to implement over the next couple of years, all of a sudden they did it overnight. How is that impacting your world? Is that part of it as well?
Well, fortunately, we were set up from an e-commerce perspective. We have several key e-commerce customers. We were set up well coming into this, and so we've experienced tremendous growth as consumers continue to do more shopping online. The digitization that, like this conversation that we're having, is clearly something that's new to many of us. And then again, it's a combination of reach, which is mass media, but also targeted marketing, as we've discussed, like social media as well.
One thing that stuck out with me, and it's something I'm kind of applying to my life, but you said, is how to take work out of the system. And it's interesting that you talked about this. So how do you take work out of the system at Smucker's? Because, right, I think you had said to me, you know, in the past, you might have had a big meeting and everybody got to weigh in and, making sure everybody, collaboration was number one. And you've taken some of that out.
Right. There's a few things, some of which we talked about, like the divestitures, making very conscious decisions about what's in or out of our portfolio. But even in terms of how we work, we have migrated to smaller meetings. We're trying to make decisions quicker. And then, once the decision is made, you walk out of the quote virtual meeting and you go and you execute. So a focus on potentially smaller groups, clean, clear decisions, and then action has been really key to our success during this time.
How do you think, your culture and your strategies have changed the most over the last year because of what we've all been dealing with, what you've been dealing with as head of a company?
I would just start by saying keeping the core and protecting the core, as we talked about, it starts with me as a leader. I think the best leaders are those who are both authentic and vulnerable. And so bringing our whole selves to work, I truly believe that, and that as myself, the leaders on my team, holding them accountable to behave in that same way sets the foundation. In terms of what's changed, it's everything that we've already talked about in terms of being more agile, focusing, and making those focused areas really stick, and not deviating, not adding work back to the system once we come out of this pandemic and can take a deeper breath.
How do you make sure that happens? Because you know how it's so easy, like everybody comes back and it's like, oh, let's have a meeting, let's invite everybody. Like, how do you, as a leader, make sure, like, wait a minute, we've made some progress here?
Well, I think, again, it starts at the top. I have to model that behavior. My team has to model that behavior. And we will do that. It's interesting how many conversations that we've had just with my own executive team on ensuring that we continue this behavior coming out of the pandemic.
So I'd be remiss, we are Bloomberg. Tell me, coming out of the pandemic, is it this year? What kind of visibility do you feel like you have about what the outlook looks like and for your business?
We feel really good. I think the changes that we have been able to make under the cover of the pandemic have really set us up for success. We've talked about many of those things, whether it's agility, innovation, but focusing on maintaining our culture. I really do believe that the fundamentals are there, and we will continue to grow our business off of this new base.
All right, and I got to ask you, the one thing, though, that puts you a little bit on edge, makes you a little anxious going forward.
What makes me anxious?
Yeah.
I think one thing that always keeps us up at night is our competition. We have fantastic competitors in this industry, and we are keen to observe them and learn from them as well. So responding to some of our competitive threats is something that we take very seriously. I think beyond that, we would like to all see a world where there is mutual respect across the board for every human being. And I look forward to a better world coming out of this pandemic.